Hello, fellow foodies. Welcome back. This is Dr. Cassandra Quabe, and you're listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the science podcast for the food curious. On today's show, we have a really special guest who's going to take us through some of the steps to the actions of regulation and the actions of quality control are actually like within the dietary supplement industry. So our guest is Elan Sudberg. He's the CEO of Alchemist Labs, which is a passionately committed contract testing lab that specializes in plant authentication, botanical ingredient identification, and quantitative analytical services for the food and beverage industries, nutraceutical and cosmeceutical industries as well. He holds a degree in chemistry from California State University, Long Beach, and has authored numerous articles on phytochemistry and analytical techniques for natural products and the nutraceutical industry. It's so great to see you, Elan. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's quite an honor. Listening to your podcast and now being on it's just super fun.
Thank you. Awesome. Love to hear that. Well, I thought it would be fun if we maybe just start with some of the basics. What can you share with us about the history of the dietary supplement industry and kind of how we got to where we are today?
So thousands of years in a quick summary, we all took dietary supplements many years ago, thousands of years ago. That was medicine. That is medicine. And since the history of trade, people have been trying to make sure they get the right stuff. And so, long ago, our techniques were organoleptic, which, our eyes, our noses, our mouths, going back to the spice trade, did you get pepper or not? You would smell it and taste it. And someone with a good olfactory system would be like, yeah, that's cut, or no, it's not cut. So that, the beginning starts off as simply as that. A lot of folks don't think the dietary supplement industry is regulated, but it is very regulated by the FDA heavily. And there's been, renditions of those rules. Most recently in 2007, the GMPs came out, the Good Manufacturing Practices, which reestablished the rules that already existed as far as the testing required to play professionally and responsibly in this industry. So, and we started the lab right around the same time. Actually, 10 years before that. It had a nice 10-year float period of not much regulation. Then in 2007, regulations picked up, and we've been extremely busy ever since.
That's great. Well, I think one of the points of confusion is how FDA approves drugs versus dietary supplements are not approved. You have to have proof of efficacy and safety with an FDA approved drug, which is something you don't have to have for dietary supplements. But as you mentioned, there are other areas around manufacturing and quality control that are regulated. Maybe you can share a little bit more about that with us.
Absolutely. Yeah. We are regulated very differently than drugs. Obviously, the industry cannot make claims unless you have clinical studies to back those up. And that actually goes back to, the 60s with Kennedy signing I believe it's the Kefauver-Harris Amendment, which was really a fallout of the thalidomide, a FDA-approved safe drug, which ended up being not so safe and taken off the market very quickly. After that, they basically said, hey, you're going to have to do some safety studies. I'm summarizing quite a bit of language. Safety studies, but what that actually did to the dietary supplement industry is made us not allowed to say this does that. And since that, we've just been focusing, the industry has been, a lot of folks get in trouble for breaking those rules, obviously, whether they know it or not. The pharmaceutical industry obviously has the ability to make claims that, drug claims, and our industry does not. So we focus on it is what you think it is. It has the quantity of compounds that you hoped for, and then it's free of contaminants, the heavy metals, pesticides, microbial issues.
So can you give us an example of a claim? When I think of this with regards to dietary supplements, I think of, something like promotes immune health or for gut health, or this very generic thing. So that's not considered a claim. But if I were to say, this is specifically, you take this to treat diarrhea, that's a claim. Okay.
Correct. And I have this saying that I made up a while ago that labs cost less than lawyers. The lawyers are there for a reason, and to make sure that you can get as close to making that claim. So you said the words may, everyone's very careful about what they can say, and there's lots of good regulatory lawyers in the industry to make sure you can get as close to it as possible. But you're correct. You cannot say will prevent or cure your diarrhea as an example.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. I think journalists take that perspective as well. You see a lot of, when there are exciting new articles in the scientific literature, primarily in animal studies at this point, for many of them, it says, this plant may help with Alzheimer's, or it may, so may is a critical
Right.
critical word. There's a lot still in progress.
Which I think is the funny part about, this, and you probably know this more than I do, but I forget how many percentage of our medicines or pharmaceuticals come from originally plants, right? So it's
Yeah.
all originating from plants and fungus and things from the ground. And then at some point in time, we single the compounds out and we brand them and then we make the claims, but they're all coming from plants mostly. Which
Yeah, I know they are, right? Yeah. Well, I think I can't remember the number right now, but there's a pretty substantial number of pharmaceuticals that were originally discovered in or modeled after compounds found in plants.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So let's talk a bit about some of the challenges when it comes to the safe production and distribution of plants. And let's start with the most basic thing, and that's identification and botanical authentication. So
Right.
at Alchemist, you guys work on this. What does that actually look like, and why is that step really important to the industry?
Yeah, it's critical. I mean, the first step in GMP compliance is identity testing. It makes no sense to spend money on pesticides, microbial, or heavy metals on the wrong material. It also makes no sense to throw an ingredient through clinical studies, which do happen in our industry quite often, more frequently these days than ever, if you have the wrong starting ingredient. And the fact is, plants are complicated. They're promiscuous. We don't have iguanas and dogs breeding to new creatures yet. Maybe soon, who knows? But peppermint spearmint haven't been peppermint spearmint for years. They've been hybrids of each other forever, and these plants are challenging. And so the fact is, there's only a couple in our industry. We trade about 2,000 plants as an example. This fungus, obviously, there's many more of those, but of those 2,000, there's only a few with poisonous cousins. And I say cousins, gently in the botanical world. But we still have to make sure you have the right material starting. One, because you could have the wrong one, could make people sick. But two, because there are other lawyers on different sides that are looking to get people in trouble and, for having the wrong genus and species. So I also have a saying that, you could probably put your species away and just talk about genus in a lot of cases. Because there's a lot of plants that are, that end up, the echinaceas as an example, Angustifolia pala, purpurea. Plant parts are important, obviously, but in most cases, those plants can be interchanged, or licorice, Chinese licorice versus not Chinese licorice, Glycyrrhiza urolentis versus glabra. In the monographs, they're interchanged for thousands of years. But if you say glabra and you have urolentis on your label, you can have a lot of trouble. So the first step in GMP compliance is identity testing. And as I mentioned earlier, we could do that with organoleptic techniques, macroscopic, looking at things with your eyes or a low-level microscope. The next one would be microscopy, which is how I kind of cut my teeth in this industry, looking at plants under the microscope. Amazingly, most plants have different cellular characteristics from each other. And there's, a lot of plants on Earth, and they look like each other in some cases, but the surface could be completely different, with different hairs, different stomata, different orgastic cell contents with crystals and whatnot. To go further, we do HPTLC, so high performance thin layer chromatography. Which works on all plants in the raw material, but where microscopy stops is when you extract something. So a lot of folks don't realize that, like, as an example, Lipton iced tea is an extract of tea leaves. You put it in the water and it dissolves. There's no more plant material in there. Those are chemicals from plants.
From the
And
plants.
so, yeah, and so microscopy is looking at cellular features. Well, there's no more cellular features at that point. So you have to do chemical techniques, which is a very beautiful and nuanced chemical separation technique, and shows a band pattern. We don't always know exactly what each of those bands are. In some cases we do, but in most cases we actually don't. And you compare the band pattern of a known versus an unknown, you can say a positive identity. That technique's going on, I think, over 100 years old, accepted globally. And it's what we actually have specialized in for all these years. Of course,
so it's like a fingerprint match, basically.
Exactly.
You're saying the fingerprint of this matches that one. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. You see it, a CSI, the DNA of a suspect versus whatever. It's the same exact pattern. Instead of proteins, they're plant chemicals. Those are the primary techniques we use in this industry for identity testing. Of course, there are new, I'll call them tricorders on the market, lab in a box type things, which we're not a huge fan of. Obviously, not a lot of validation, and they're kind of new to the scene. So we're still waiting for them to work out those kinks. But HPTLC and microscopy and macroscopy are the primary identification techniques for plants and mushrooms.
That's great. So do herbarium voucher specimens play a role here as a curative in herbarium? I'm always curious to see like where those fit in within the industry.
And I've got a slightly different take on the herbarium because we obviously have an herbarium. We call it an herbarium. We have almost 20,000 specimens in there from the 2,000 plants and fungus we test. It actually started as a hoarding issue of my father's. He would basically test samples and he would keep them. And, you have to have control samples. So we worked early on with the wonderful Roy Upton of the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia. We did work for him. He gave us reference materials to start our herbarium, and we sort of perpetuated the herbarium from that point on. But where we get into, I wouldn't say trouble, but, some of the academics don't like our herbarium because they're actually mostly consisting of samples from trade. So when we test an incoming sample for any customer, if it passes and they donate it back and we want to keep it, we keep it. We use that to compare against other reference materials, and we sort of perpetuate reference materials. So when we test something,
so it's more like a retention voucher then, kind of. You're talking about like pieces of leaves and things, not a full like flowering specimen.
Now
I mean, we keep retention vouchers as well, in addition to our full specimens.
Now the interesting thing about retention vouchers for our sake is that we do have lots of pressed specimens from various botanists around the world, and the raw material for those. But if you take as an example lavender grown in the wild, I'm not sure where you'd find that. It will test out microscopically, probably similar to the lavender traded in the industry. If you take lavender, wild crafted lavender grown however it felt like growing through the universe, and compare that chemically to industry traded, you're going to get very different materials because the industry perpetuates certain quality parameters, whereas natural lavender is it's like an alley cat versus a purebred. And so in our case, HPTLC and vouchers don't do well because most of the vouchers we get are wildcrafted, grown out in the wilderness, not perpetuated by a corporation with growing conditions and fertilizing conditions and whatnot. So our herbarium is actually a mixture of pressed specimens, academics vouchers, as well as mostly industry collected specimens for 25 years. So I've got lavender for 25 years from all over the world, from all different companies in a nice size room, ready to be tested against.
That's great. Yeah, I think one of the big challenges when working with botanicals is, as you mentioned, you can have a very different secondary metabolite profile between the same species grown in different conditions. We've done a lot of work with our collaborators in the Balkans, looking at even like pine resin chemistry from pine trees grown on one side of the mountain compared to the other, or at higher elevations or lower, and it's amazing. You get a lot of the same compounds, but they can be there in very different levels. And that's really because they use those compounds for their defense or to deal with different environmental factors. I'm
not surprisingly, I'm not a good gardener. I just really never put enough time to say I garden, but I have had a few gardens. I wanted to do like a salsa garden and a tomato sauce garden. So I have the things for salsa, and I'm notorious for taking jalapenos and making them not hot, which we can do by watering them. If you're mean to jalapenos, you don't water them and you're just mean to them, they get spicy, they stay spicy. You give them all the water they need, they're like, life's good. Why produce protective compounds that make things spicy? And so to your example of the pine on one side of the mountain versus another, absolutely, you can water a plant differently. You can change those metabolites.
That's amazing. And you're absolutely right. I mean, plants are very they really engage, I think, in ways that we don't necessarily see until we look really under the hood at their chemical profiles. So one other challenge in the industry has been around this issue of mistaken identity. And there's one particular case study I give for my students of looking at different species of star anise. I don't know if you're familiar with some of the story. This kind of came about when I was in graduate school, where there were some people were making teas of star anise. It looks macroscopically very similar to, the two species look very similar, but chemically there were some pretty big differences that were, bringing newborns into the hospital because of those side effects. So can you tell us a bit more, so if you have a case like that where the macroscopic evaluation of the plant part, because again, in trade, you don't always get the full plant. How do you work around that? Is that where microscopy and kind of HPTLC comes into play?
Yeah, so any botanist will tell you the best way to identify a plant is obviously in the flowering state. Now, in that case, I do recall I believe there's some deaths in an herb shop in San Francisco not that long ago. And, as you mentioned, the difference macroscopically is, I think it's 5 lobes versus 4 or something like that. So macroscopic, you could tell the difference, but if you don't look carefully enough, they look pretty much the same, right? That's, if you're lucky enough to get it in the whole form, you might be able to do the difference. Now, once it's powdered, you can't tell the difference between the two. It's brown, orange, and brown and orange, and it smells beautiful and smells beautiful. My crossbreed does a decent job, but we would rely on HPTLC for that. And that's, it's a simple, inexpensive test that one could actually do on their own with simple kits that, as you just shared, it could result in saving or not hurting someone or not killing someone. And that's a great example of two genuses where that is a case where there's a poisonous cousin, as an example. And accidentally traded quite often.
Yeah. And a lot of the work I was just in Albania and Kosovo this summer. And one of the questions that we were asking on this field expedition, working with local communities, is trying to understand like what the current state of herb trade is, because in many of these very remote kind of montane areas, and the Balkans provide something like 8%, I think, of all the medicinal plant trade, which is like an absurd amount from such a small area. And these are often collected by children.
Right.
So when the children are out watching the sheep, herding goats, they're also collecting these plants and they bring them back. And, you may not be that surprised to know that sometimes they grab the wrong thing, because some of these species look very similar or, within the same genus, but there can be, even threatened or endemic species that get mixed in there. They're dried at the home. And then, a guy in a van comes around and buys up what you have in the bags, and then it makes its way into European and US markets. So, what's the industry doing at this stage? I know it's, it's just such a challenge because this is happening in tiny villages all over the globe for these wildcrafted herbs. What can we do to kind of help guide people to get the right species or have better control on the input side?
It's interesting that the story you tell the children picking the herbs. That's actually how this lab actually started. We were making tinctures for my father, who's a retired chiropractor, acupuncturist, had a line of tinctures. I grew up basically with hydraulic presses and bitter herbs in the garage. And so I was pressing herbs as a youngster. We started the lab for our internal quality control, but then something actually woke up the industry, which is an adulteration of Plantago. So the wrong species was picked along Digitalis versus Plantago lanceolato.
Oh, wow.
This is back in 1996 or so. One worked on the gut, one worked on the heart. They got mixed up and people ended up in the hospital with heart attacks. And so the FDA responded by teaching a course, which my father took, and then the lab actually started. So based upon very simple harvesting techniques, just grabbing maybe all the stuff rather than just the stuff. So the industry's really woken up by that one instance. And to combat that, we've had some resources. The FDA put out GMPs. They've taught courses. The techniques we do here at the lab are very old. They're hundreds of years old, if not many hundreds. Microscopies hundreds, HPTLCs hundreds. So the industry knows what they're supposed to do. It's almost like there's a stop sign and there's just not enough cops to patrol the stop sign. So we all know, everyone knows you're supposed to stop at a stop sign. Some of us slow down, cruise. Some of us just go right through. And so the industry has, there's amazing companies in this industry, and then there's people who are maybe ignorant to the rules or just completely disobey them until they get caught. And that's few and far between. I want to make that clear that the industry is not full of those players, or at least we're not aware of it. But to combat those types of potential issues, you spend a few $100s at a decent lab, and you can make sure that you're not going to kill someone.
That your products are safe for sure.
Yeah. And then you get through they're not going to kill someone because they're safe, but then are they going to work? You can't talk about work too well, but if you have certain compounds that may cause or have impact on health conditions, you want to measure those, and that's what we can do to make sure you have the better quality materials. And then of course, then you go into pesticides and heavy metals and microbial just to make sure it's also not going to kill you.
Yeah. And so when you talk about the compounds that you're looking for that may be bioactive, would those be called like your marker compounds that you're trying? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I like to say marker compounds or market compounds.
Oh, market. Okay, great.
Right? It depends on how strong the marketing department is in that company, because there's compounds that are being marketed that we're not really sure if they're the magic bullet or if there's any magic bullet. I mean, pharmaceuticals take the compound single and take it out of the plant. Herbal medicine's been the one with using kind of all of them, this sort of synergistic effect of all of sort. Now coined as the entourage effect in the cannabis industry, for example. It's the synergistic effect. It's been that way for all of herbal medicine from the very beginning. So
absolutely. Yeah.
So people measure some or many. sometimes they just want to know if the caffeine quantity in their green tea, because they're going to ultimately have a caffeine centric product.
Mm-hmm. That's a really great point. Yeah, I mean, if you think about even the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded, I think, back in 2015 for the discovery of this compound from a plant called artemisinin from the wormwood plant. And
Right.
of course, now we have widespread drug resistance to the single compound, but some interesting studies have shown that when you look at the whole plant, you
Right.
restore activity. And I think it goes back to that entourage, that synergy of
Yeah.
multiple chemistries at play in those activities.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the scale of this industry. I think that sometimes it's really underestimated. Can you share anything with us about like the market size, like how much is involved in
Yeah.
this dietary supplement industry? I mean, we're talking about millions in
Oh,
trade, billions.
it's
What are we
billions.
talking about?
And I
Hmm.
don't have the exact numbers. It's billions, and it grew in the last few years for obvious reasons because of the pandemic.
Hmm.
It sort of accelerated a few years up. Like we're where we thought we would be in 2026, because people, were, regardless of what side you're on, or of any side of the various arguments around the pandemic, we all wanted to take better care of our bodies. Even if you took medicines or didn't take medicines, immune health is important. And it's funny that we've been around for long enough to see a few economic downturns and various global crises. So the housing crisis, was it 2008? I think, I forget exactly when it was, but the last recession, people take better care of themselves when they
Yeah.
can't afford healthcare. So they actually took more supplements and vitamins. Surprisingly, that was still high on their list of things to buy when they were short on cash, because they don't want to go to the doctor. So when our customers sell more herbs, we test more herbs, and we've actually grown through all of the various recessions and pandemics. But back to your question, the industry is growing fast. Obviously for obvious reasons, the pandemic put sort of immune health on the market, whether it's vitamin
Hmm.
D or zinc, or various countries. I think Thailand was promoting andrographis
Hmm.
extract for treatment of COVID. I mean, they explicitly said to do that to their population. So herbs have been sort of put back on the market. Dietary supplements been put back on the map, so to speak, globally. So it's fast growing. And then also the big pharma industry and just big food, like Nestle is buying up companies left and right. P&G is buying up companies left and right.
Interesting.
Hormel, Reckitt Benckiser, Clorox owns a probiotics company, which is kind of funny because Clorox kills
Kills it
biotics,
really
and
good.
then it sells biotics on the other side, which I just think is fun to talk about. But yeah, so the big players in the food industry who said no thanks to the dietary supplement industry maybe 5-10 years ago have completely pivoted and are quickly getting their foot in
Mm.
the door.
I wonder
Which,
if that's a good or bad thing.
I
I don't
can speak.
know.
I can speak to that. We have a customer, New Chapter, who was purchased by Procter and Gamble, and I can't speak to the culture change or just the operational changes. I imagine things changed when Procter and Gamble came in, but I know they've, not to double down, like quadrupled down on quality once they came
Oh,
in. And not that there
great.
was an issue, but
Mhm.
they brought their own, Procter and Gamble type of level of concern above and
Mhm.
beyond, I'll say, to that product. So it's been nothing but testing since they made that acquisition. Now, I can't say that's been the case for all large acquisitions, that the original brand soul has been retained, but and there's a lot of people who are against the big companies buying the little companies, but it's sort of inevitable. It happens in all industries.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to note too that, botanicals and the trade of medicinal plants is relevant not only to the dietary supplement industry, the food and beverage industry, but also cosmeceuticals and
Yeah,
personal care products. So our
absolutely.
soaps, our deodorants, our
Yeah,
shampoos, our face creams, there's a gazillion products on the market to make you look younger or to treat your acne. And a lot of those have botanicals that are
yeah.
part of the primary formulation.
I just walk through the store shelves and I see all these brands that I know.
Hmm.
I don't test for that brand, but I test for the company who supplies the lavender for that brand, and I feel good to know that.
Nice.
I look at the back label. I'm like, we touched that botanical, or at some point in time.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Well, you also mentioned cannabis, and I think that's one of the big elephants in the room because cannabis, I'm sure, is also contributing to this massive growth in the industry when it comes to edibles.
yeah,
What's happening now with product quality control with cannabis, especially for edibles? Because I know that's been an area I've been a little bit nervous about because it's been a bit of the Wild West with so many different companies coming out and different
yeah,
extraction methodologies being used and THC
yeah,
being super concentrated in some of these products.
yeah.
What perspectives can you offer on that?
Whew, it's I want to say it's a mess. I mean, we're actually not involved in the recreational cannabis side of things. We do a little hemp testing.
Hmm.
Oddly enough, our customers for the cannabis market are the local district attorney and agricultural commissioners who are making sure their
Interesting.
constituents are harvesting hemp and not recreational, because I think that there's different fees involved, and they want to make
Ah.
sure that one is
Hmm.
not the other. We have this nasty habit of producing accurate results, and so when I tell you your lavender is zero point 0.4 and you have to throw it away versus 0.29 and you can keep it, we suddenly become very unpopular in a
Mm.
very fast moving, dynamic industry. So I'm trying to say it as gently as possible, but we were doing quite a bit of hemp testing. All those customers went away because we were causing failures, which meant large scale destruction of. There's no
Mm.
send it back in that industry. The cannabis industry, at least in California, is very strict. If it's 0.34, it's now considered recreational. You've got to throw that away.
Mm.
And jokingly, there's probably more THC in my beard hair than there is in hemp these days, because that
Yeah.
number originally was arbitrary. I mean, that whole original thing rests on some silly political numbers. So that's why I think it's kind of a mess. Also, we have a DEA registration for testing all of the plants and fungus, and DEA Schedule 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is really great for a lab, but means it's only good for federal. So I basically can't work with any of the recreational cannabis companies because they're all federally out of compliance.
Okay. Yeah, because of the
So,
federal law.
right. So
Yeah.
California legal, Garden Grove legal, wherever you are state-wise, have their own little rules. But the big rock that we sit on, the United States, I play by those rules. So we don't touch
Yeah.
cannabis, but I'm aware and I've been following it. I was actually the original chair of the American Herbal Product Association Cannabis Committee,
Great.
um, which started, in this industry, and as a result, afterwards, the CBD industry came and flooded our market as an alternative to inflammation potentially or sleep
Hmm.
issues. It was said that it was a flash in the pan, and it absolutely was. The spike went up and the spike went down. Still, there are a lot of really great companies working with really great products. Legality, it's been tricky, because the
Hmm.
federal legal is parts of that. But um, it's been a mess because so many different regulations from state to state, and the labs are trying to comply with one versus the other, and it's just a complicated mess. And then on top of that, some of the biggest labs are going under in that industry,
Oh,
which
wow.
just close their doors, not sold, but close their doors, which I think speaks volumes to the challenge. Um, I have a really great client base, so when people ask us what's our failure rate, it's pretty low because we have some of the best clients in the industry, but I also compete against cheaters. There's a few labs in our industry that shouldn't be open these days. As I
Oh.
understand it, in the
Hmm.
cannabis space, there's a lot. There's a lot of problems
Yeah.
with dry labbing and just inaccurate results. So back to that original point three, throw it away or not. I want to mention, you talked about gummies, and I graduated high school in '97 when that original California law was coming out, and it was medical cannabis. The intention was to take fire and apply it to the dried flower plant, and inhale that in your lungs to treat, various medical ailments. I don't think they ever said, "Oh, and go ahead and use supercritical fluid extraction
Yeah,
techniques, take
exactly.
all these compounds out, isolate it, and make it 98% and kill the dummy." That was never allowed, and I'm still amazed that there are vape pens. I'm not saying I'm pro or against. I'm just amazed that there are now legal pulmonary applications of
Yeah.
delivery of fine chemicals, which you couldn't do that. I couldn't take Echinacea angustifolia echinacasides, throw it in some propylene glycol in a vape pen and sell that. I'd be in, FTC would
Oh,
be.
I know. It's wild. And I have so many concerns about the vapes. I'm a mother of high school students,
Yeah,
and I have one going to college soon. And I'll tell
yeah,
you, like, they sell these vapes in the high school bathrooms and in the
yeah,
gym. And I'm like, my kids I was like, what are you doing? You don't even know who made these. If they're, I need to
yeah,
like test these by a mass spec or throw them on the
yeah.
GC and see what actually is in here.
What is in there?
It's,
We didn't
yeah,
have
it's,
we don't have data on cannabinoids, single cannabinoids going directly into the lungs. I mean,
mhm,
now we do. We've got years of like sort of
yeah,
street data, but that was never what was intended. And I'm just
yeah.
amazed that FDA has not stepped in. I'm not saying I want them to. I'm just saying I'm just amazed watching the regulations on chamomile in my industry. I
Yeah.
couldn't take a chamomile product and inhale it. It's sublingual maybe, and digestive tract only. I can't even put a patch on my
A few
skin, but
ml. Wow.
right, but you can extract cannabinoids, isolate them, fortify them, and throw them in a pineapple flavored propylene glycol solution to be directly into my lung. I just, yeah. So
It's wild. It's wild.
so in
Yeah.
one way, I feel like we missed the bus of cannabis, but another way, I'm glad I'm not on that bus because I hear all sorts of terrible stories of how hard it is to play legitimately in that field.
Yeah. Well, from your perspective within the field, what are some of the big challenges that are arising or other maybe exciting things that are coming about in the industry?
As the industry grows, we get more sophisticated. We get new companies with more sophistications in there, but also marketing. I
Hmm.
think one of the areas that's exciting to me is that the quality story is now finally being told. As I mentioned, that Kefauver Harris Amendment that basically stopped anyone from saying this does work, unless you
Hmm.
spend tons of money in pharmaceuticals, and that's kind of where we stop. So we can't even say our products work. Everyone thinks they're snake oil and unregulated, and so I still have friends that tell me, "Oh, that's not a regulated industry, is it?" I'm like, we've been doing this for 26 years. It's clearly regulated.
Hmm.
So where I'm going with this is that there's this new movement of taking quality out of the closet, so to speak. All the good
Nice.
companies have spent the money already, but they put these reports, millions of dollars of quality control testing with various labs. They put the products in a drawer of a mid-level quality control professional, never to be used again. And something I've been speaking about loudly is that no, this is marketing gold. I actually consider
Hmm.
myself a marketing guy with a chemistry degree. So
Like that.
so I think, why not take out the quality data from the very beginning? Yes, it's chamomile. Here's the identity test. Who cares if you know what HPTLC is? Share it. You spent the money. And so there's
Well, and
companies.
people can see a picture. I mean, a picture is worth a
Yeah,
thousand words, and you
exactly.
can show
Yeah.
like this matches. You
Yeah,
don't have
this
to be a
matches.
chemist to get that. Yeah.
We've all have our degree from CSI, so we
Yeah.
can know that that's the band that matches that band. So, I think it's time to really shout from mountaintops, especially for the companies that are doing the work, that are spending the money, because there are some companies that are not, and they're cheating, and our industry is competing against each other unfairly in a lot of cases. So my whole spiel is like, take the quality out, share it from the mountaintops, make it accessible to the consumers, where it's a QR code that brings to a report that they don't understand. It's access to the backstory of quality, which is a movement happening, and you'll start to see that more and more. It might just be our last value proposition. We can't say it works. You can't say much more than it is this, and it's free from contaminants. And everyone has a little cool logo that says quality tested, but no one actually has anything beyond that to
And
show
that.
what people like us do with our expensive equipment to prove that it is, in fact, the right plant, has the right compounds in it, and it's free from contaminants.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I personally, coming from a chemistry background, but I would love to have that on like even my herbal tea because you have blends of different ingredients as
Right.
well. And how amazing would it be to be able to actually
Yeah.
pull that up on a QR code on the box and
It's close. We're getting really close on
yeah,
it. Yeah.
that's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, one other question I had since you've got your finger on the pulse is what's new in ingredients? I mean, are there some new and interesting
Yeah.
botanicals that are going to be coming out soon, do you think, that we should keep an eye out for?
Yeah. Adaptogens showed up. It's what's funny. There's nothing new in ingredients. These have been around for thousands of
I
years,
know,
right?
yeah, there's like
But
34,000 species used as
yeah,
medicine on Earth, right? So it's like
exactly.
new in the sense of new to the broader market.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. But the
Yeah.
marketing of these ingredients, the adaptogens have been around forever, but now they've been obviously put on the map several years back.
Hmm.
The immunity herbs are very popular. There's obviously this elderberries and the andrographis, things like that for respiratory health. But what I'm seeing is this sort of mushroom boom, the shroom boom, as they're calling it. Whether it's
Shroom boom, like reishi and
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, medicinal mushrooms. I mean, I took cordyceps, reishi, lion's mane, and maitake this morning with my other supplements. That's a new
Uh-huh.
addition to my daily regime of supplements, a palm full every morning and night. So the shroom boom is definitely new. They're making a huge movement in the industry, being combined with other herbs and medicinals. But I'd also say the psychedelic part of that,
Hmm.
from the shrooms, mushrooms to obviously to other various plants, is making an interesting ripples. Again, things that have been around for thousands of years. They're not new. They're just been popularized by maybe attitudes changing or needs changing. Like we're all seeking bliss, so to speak, and it's a very
Yeah.
complicated world these days. Um, was it Prozac is a $20 billion a year industry. I mean, tells you a lot about what just the American public is seeking. And I believe strongly that there's other alternatives out there to pharmaceutical drugs in plants that have been growing, in your sidewalks for years.
Yeah.
Where that ends up, I'm hoping not like cannabis. I'm hoping I don't think it will be like cannabis because there's already a lot of really big established companies and universities doing a lot of really interesting research and work on these products professionally and legitimately responsibly. So it's not going to be, there probably won't be a ayahuasca store next to a nail salon anytime soon, like there is a CBD store,
Yeah.
But you'll start to see that, I believe, in mainstream media being promoted as alternatives to pharmaceutical drugs. And then where I'm trying to figure out where that lives in the dietary supplement industry, because dietary supplements have not been medicine. We're over here and sort of like we supplement good diet, but there's no question about it. The psychedelic mushrooms and plants have medicinal properties that are going to be used for particular medical issues. So they don't exactly fit, but they are parallel. So I think we'll eventually, as legalization changes, we might start to see some interesting products of adaptogens with, or maybe a microdose of psilocybin mushroom with other types of herbs and, synergistically helping each other out.
Yeah. Oh man, it's such a fascinating topic. I'm organizing this joint conference of the Society for Economic Botany and the Society of Ethnobiology in June here at Edinburgh in 2023. And one of our symposia topics is going to be on this, on kind of getting a better understanding of the use of entheogens and psychedelics in indigenous medicine and where that's going today with modern applications in medicine. I'm really excited about what's happening with psilocybin.
Yeah.
And studies on phantom leg pain and end of life studies and also treatments for depression. I mean, I think it's really exciting. And I eagerly await some of those papers as they come out running these clinical trials. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, that, to be personal, that's been an important part of my life for a long time. Some of these important psychedelic plants and fungus. And I believe in them personally, but I think there's a lot of potential. Like I didn't even think about the phantom leg pain potentials.
Well, that's like one of my personal things, as an amputee, I deal with phantom leg, and it's one of those weird things. It's part nervous system, part psychological, I guess, but it's this very weird sensation, and there isn't really a good treatment for it. So
it's just fascinating that there are theories that the psilocybin mushroom is what brought our consciousness out from, so to speak, the apes or whatever. And here we are now, I don't know, tens of thousands or 100,000 years later, reinvestigating how potentially powerful these products are, and they grow everywhere. They're sustainable. They do their own thing. A lot of really interesting companies doing internal growths. Upward versus flat, and I'm super excited about that part of the industry.
That's cool. Well, I have another plant I want to ask you about, and this is a species that's been used by some people to help them deal with addiction, and that is kratom, or Mitragina speciosa. It's from Asia. Is that kind of entering the dietary supplement market, or I don't know what the regulation looks like right now for that. I can find it in my local herb shop. So I'm like,
gas stations and next to the erectile difficulty stuff. It's unfortunately got a bad rap, but it does have a huge amount of potential, and we test that quite a bit. For the mitragynine and whatnot. I think it's still legal most places, but I think I recall asking a question at a trade association, can we test it to make sure that you have the best quality, almost illegal product? And the answer is obviously yes. But that's definitely one that's in the dietary supplement industry. It's on the fringe, unfortunately, because anything that works gets abused. Most things that work are either regulated or illegal. And I think the government's still trying to figure out where kratom should be. Should be illegal, should be regulated like a drug. But there's, pallets and pallets and pallets being brought into the United States, and we're testing quite a bit.
Well, and there are different chemotypes, I know for sure. Like there have been papers that have shown, like when I say, for the audience, a chemotype is the same species, but there are some variations of which like produce less of the active compounds.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And like you said, back to the pine, like where it grows, shade grown versus not shade grown. If I had not started the lab right out of college, I would have gone into sort of like secondary metabolite analysis. So like what tweaks can you do to amplify certain compounds. So, back to the original method, or the chat you had about the pine, where it grows makes a difference, how it grows makes a difference. And you can sort of amplify these plants to produce more and more.
Yeah. Well, as a consumer, what advice do you have for us? Like, if I'm in the store, there's so many options, there's so many different labels. Like, what are the things that we should be looking for?
I would say transparency. I think there is nothing to hide. There's no reason not to share your data. Now, I'm saying this, but very few brands are actually there yet in the dietary supplement industry. A lot of them have a page about their quality. Some have more, some have less. As an example, Gaia Herbs, a wonderful company who is such a great company. They don't test with us because they have such great internal facilities. And it's not me, not getting paid by Gaia, but they have their Meet Your Herbs program. Basically, you type in a lot number and you can see all the quality control data that they've produced internally. They've been doing that for a long time, as I understand it. They have very few click rates on the actual thing, but it's the access to that data. So I think seeking out brands that are transparent as far as where they're getting the materials from, how the people are treated, are these sustainable practices? Do they concern themselves with environmentality? Those are all really important features. But I think also the quality control transparency is a value proposition that I would suggest looking for. I always tell people that the lowest priced product is probably not that great, nor is the highest priced product not that great. It's usually it's on both sides, that someone's cheating someone on both sides. And look for lab data if it's available. Look at it. Look at the lot number. I'd even say request it. Again, they all have to do these tests. They all have these tests. It's in a drawer. Take it out, share it. So I tell folks, people always ask me what to buy, and I'm careful not to look like I'm endorsed by anyone, because I'm not. But I'm endorsed by quality, and if a brand is sharing their quality, I endorse them.
That's great advice. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Elan, for being on the show. It's great to speak with you.
Likewise, my pleasure. And if you're ever in the Orange County area, come on by for a lab tour.
Oh, absolutely. You've been listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the science podcast for the food curious, recorded today for you on Restream. I want to send a shout out to our producers, Rob Cohen and Christine Roth. And I want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in every week. We've got lots of great episodes coming out to you this season. We're in season 4 of Foodie Pharmacology. So be sure to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. Thanks so much for listening. Stay healthy out there, and we'll see you next time.